December 19, 1944, the Ardennes forest. The snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the frozen hills of Belgium, muffling the distant rumble of artillery. Inside a stone farmhouse converted into a German command post, Major Friedrich von Leutwitz stood hunched over a map table, his breath visible in the unheated room. The kerosene lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the wrinkled paper marked with red and blue pencil lines. His staff officers moved quietly around him, their faces drawn, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying with it the faint metallic taste of snow and cordite. Von Leutwitz traced his finger along the southern edge of the bulge his forces had carved into American lines. For 5 days, the offensive had pushed forward with stunning speed. Villages fell, American units scattered. The Führer's grand gamble seemed for a brief moment to be working. But now, on this frozen December afternoon, a new name began appearing in the intelligence reports, a name that made even hardened German officers pause mid-sentence. Patton. The Third Army was moving. And it was moving fast. To understand the terror that name inspired, one must first understand what George S. Patton Jr. represented to the German military mind by the winter of 1944. He was not simply a general. He was a force of nature wrapped in polished cavalry boots and profanity. Since the breakout from Normandy in August, Patton's Third Army had carved a path of destruction across France that defied every conventional rule of logistics, supply, and operational tempo. Where other armies paused to consolidate, Patton attacked. Where others waited for reinforcements, he improvised. Where others saw obstacles, he saw opportunities. The German high command had studied him carefully. They knew his tactics, his aggressive nature, his preference for envelopment and speed. They had read intercepted communications, analyzed his movements, and concluded, correctly, that he was the most dangerous American field commander in the European theater. What they had not fully grasped, what they could not entirely comprehend until it was too late, was the sheer audacity of what he was capable of when pushed to his limit. When Hitler launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes offensive, on December 16th, the German planners believed they had achieved complete surprise. And they had. American units were overrun, encircled, scattered across the snow-covered hills. The 101st Airborne found itself trapped in the town of Bastogne, surrounded by German armor and infantry. The situation looked grim. Allied commanders scrambled to respond, to shift forces, to contain the breakthrough. But Eisenhower, meeting with his commanders at Verdun on December 19th, turned to Patton and asked a question that would become legendary. When can you attack? Patton's answer stunned the room. December 22nd, with 3 divisions. It was impossible. The Third Army was engaged along a front 90 miles to the south. To disengage, pivot 90 degrees north, and launch a coordinated attack in 3 days required moving nearly 250,000 men, thousands of vehicles, and entire supply networks across icy roads in the dead of winter. It violated every principle of military planning. Staff officers would need weeks to coordinate such a maneuver. Patton said he could do it in 72 hours. If you want to see how Patton pulled off the impossible, keep watching. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, hit that subscribe button and give us a like. It helps us bring you more untold stories from the war. The German officers monitoring American radio traffic and troop movements initially dismissed the reports as disinformation. It had to be. No army could pivot that quickly. No logistics network could support such a radical redeployment in winter conditions. The roads were frozen. The weather was abysmal. Surely the Americans would need time, precious time, to organize a proper counteroffensive. But Patton had been planning for exactly this scenario since early December. While other commanders focused on their current operations, Patton had quietly instructed his staff to develop contingency plans for a rapid strike north. He had studied the Ardennes terrain. He had positioned supply dumps. He had war-gamed the possibility of a German breakthrough and calculated, with his characteristic blend of intuition and calculation, that if it happened, speed would matter more than perfection. When the order came, his staff executed with machine-like precision. 3 entire divisions, the 4th Armored, the 26th Infantry, and the 80th Infantry, disengaged from their positions, wheeled north and began moving toward Bastogne. Trucks rolled through the night, their blackout lights barely illuminating the treacherous roads. Tank columns stretched for miles, their engines roaring in the cold air. Artillery batteries limbered up, displaced and repositioned. The entire Third Army became a vast, moving organism, flowing north like a steel river. German intelligence officers watched in disbelief. On December 20th, Lieutenant Colonel Hans von Luck, commanding a reconnaissance battalion near the southern flank of the Bulge, sent an urgent report to his divisional headquarters. Enemy movement detected south of Arlon. Heavy vehicle traffic moving north. Estimate division strength force. His superiors acknowledged the report but remained skeptical. A division, perhaps, but surely not the entire Third Army. By December 21st, the truth became unavoidable. Patton was coming, and he was moving faster than anyone thought possible. Inside the German command posts scattered across the Ardennes, the atmosphere shifted from confidence to concern, then to something approaching dread. Staff officers gathered around map tables, tracing the American movements with increasing alarm. Radio operators relayed fragmentary reports from forward units, tank columns here, artillery concentrations there, infantry formations moving in coordinated echelons. The scope of the operation became clear. This was not a local counterattack. This was a major offensive. General Heinrich von Leutwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps, reportedly uttered the phrase that would echo through German command channels for days. Mein Gott, bewegt sich wieder. My God, he's moving again. It became a kind of grim shorthand among German staff officers. Whenever new intelligence arrived confirming another Patton thrust, another unexpected maneuver, another impossible advance, they would exchange knowing glances and repeat the phrase with a mixture of grudging admiration and genuine fear. He's moving again. The phrase captured something essential about Patton that went beyond mere tactical skill. It was the relentlessness, the refusal to pause, to consolidate, to give his enemy a moment's rest. Where other commanders saw winter weather and thought delay, Patton saw winter weather and thought opportunity. Where others saw logistical challenges and calculated caution, Patton saw logistical challenges and calculated aggression. German commanders had faced aggressive opponents before. Zhukov in the east was aggressive. Montgomery, in his methodical way, was persistent. But Patton operated at a tempo that seemed to violate natural laws. He moved his army the way a cavalry officer moved a horse, with constant pressure, constant forward momentum, never giving the enemy time to set, to breathe, to recover. On December 22nd, exactly when he said he would, Patton attacked. The 4th Armored Division, spearheaded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion, smashed into German positions south of Bastogne. The assault was brutal and precise. American Sherman tanks, supported by infantry and artillery, broke through successive defensive lines. German units, already stretched thin by their own offensive operations, found themselves fighting in 2 directions simultaneously, pressing the attack against Bastogne while defending against Patton's relief column. The speed of the American advance shocked even veteran German troops. Oberstleutnant Remer, commanding a Kampfgruppe near Arlon, later wrote in his after-action report, "The Americans attacked with unprecedented coordination and speed. Our positions, which should have held for days, were overrun in hours. Their artillery preparation was devastating. Their tank infantry cooperation was textbook perfect. We had no time to establish proper defensive positions before they were upon us again." He's moving again. By December 23rd, the 4th Armored had advanced over 20 miles. German resistance stiffened, it had to, or the entire southern flank of the offensive would collapse, but the momentum was unstoppable. American engineers bridged streams. Supply trucks followed close behind the advancing armor, keeping the attack fueled and fed. Patton himself moved constantly between headquarters and forward positions, driving his commanders, cajoling, threatening, inspiring. "Drive like hell," he told his subordinates. "We're going to go through them like crap through a goose." It was vintage Patton, crude, direct, and absolutely clear in its intent. The German staff officers watching this unfold from their command posts experienced something they had not felt since the early days of the war: strategic helplessness. They could see what was happening. They could plot it on their maps, but they could not stop it. This was a new sensation for the Wehrmacht. In 1940, it had been German armies moving at impossible speeds, encircling Allied forces, dictating the tempo of battle. In Russia, at least initially, German mechanized formations had driven deep into Soviet territory, covering vast distances, exploiting breakthroughs with ruthless efficiency. The Wehrmacht had prided itself on operational mobility, on the ability to move faster, strike harder, and dislocate enemy formations before they could react. Now, in the winter of 1944, they were experiencing what their enemies had felt 4 years earlier. They were being outmoved, outthought, outfought. And the man doing it was George Patton. German intelligence had compiled thick dossiers on Patton by this point in the war. They knew about his cavalry background, his belief in aggressive action, his sometimes controversial command style. They knew he was a student of military history, obsessed with ancient commanders like Alexander and Hannibal. They knew he believed in reincarnation and claimed to have fought in previous wars across different eras. What they perhaps did not fully appreciate was how deeply Patton understood the psychology of warfare. He knew that battles were won not just by killing enemy soldiers, but by breaking enemy will. By moving so fast, attacking so relentlessly, appearing in unexpected places at impossible times, he created a psychological effect that multiplied his material advantages. German commanders had to plan for where Patton might strike next, not just where he was striking now. They had to hold reserves back, disperse their forces, guard against threats that might materialize anywhere along the line. He had gotten inside their decision cycle. By December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division made contact with the 101st Airborne in Bastogne. The siege was broken. The German offensive, already stalling due to fuel shortages and stiffening American resistance, had lost its southern anchor. Patton's counterattack had not just relieved Bastogne, it had fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of the entire Ardennes campaign. The Third Army continued pushing north and east, expanding the corridor into Bastogne, attacking German formations wherever they could be found. The advance covered nearly 90 miles in some sectors, through some of the worst winter weather Europe had seen in decades, against determined resistance from experienced German troops. It was, by any objective measure, one of the most remarkable operational movements of the Second World War. Years later, when historians and military analysts studied the Battle of the Bulge, they would focus on various aspects: the initial German surprise, the heroic defense of Bastogne, the eventual Allied victory. But among professional military officers, particularly those studying operational art and mobile warfare, Patton's relief of Bastogne became a case study in aggressive action and rapid redeployment. The numbers themselves tell part of the story. In 72 hours, the Third Army disengaged from active combat, pivoted 90 degrees, moved over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles across icy roads, and launched a coordinated multi-division attack. The logistical achievement alone was staggering. The fact that the attack then succeeded, breaking through prepared defenses and advancing nearly 90 miles in a week, elevated it to the realm of operational art. But numbers cannot capture the psychological dimension. Inside those German command posts, as reports came in hour after hour of new American advances, new breakthroughs, new crises demanding attention. The accumulated stress became almost unbearable. Staff officers who had planned the Ardennes offensive with such confidence found themselves scrambling to respond to threats they had not anticipated, moving reserves to shore up sectors they thought secure, watching their own offensive grind to a halt as Patton's counterattack carved into their southern flank. Bewegt sich wieder. He's moving again. The phrase became a kind of psychological surrender, an acknowledgement that they were facing an opponent who operated by different rules, at a different tempo, with a different philosophy of warfare. Where German planning emphasized thorough preparation and methodical execution, Patton emphasized speed and violence of action. Where German doctrine called for consolidating gains before pushing forward, Patton doctrine, if such a thing existed, called for exploiting success immediately, never giving the enemy time to recover. It was, in a sense, the Wehrmacht's own blitzkrieg tactics turned against them, refined and accelerated by American industrial might and Patton's aggressive genius. One German officer, captured near Bastogne in early January, was interrogated by American intelligence. When asked about the Third Army's offensive, he shook his head slowly and said, in heavily accented English, "You cannot plan against Patton. You can only hope he decides to attack somewhere else." It was the ultimate compliment from an enemy, the admission that conventional military planning was insufficient when facing such an opponent. The symbolic weight of Patton's relief of Bastogne extended far beyond the tactical and operational levels. It represented something fundamental about American military power and American ideology that the German military establishment had underestimated. Throughout the war, German commanders had often praised American material superiority while dismissing American fighting spirit and tactical skill. They acknowledged that Americans had more tanks, more trucks, more supplies, but they believed German soldiers were better trained, more motivated, more capable. There was a certain ideological comfort in this belief. It allowed German officers to explain their defeats as mere material imbalances rather than fundamental inadequacies. Patton's Ardennes offensive shattered that comfortable narrative. Here was not just material superiority, but operational excellence. Not just abundant supplies, but brilliant logistics. Not just numerous soldiers, but superbly led and coordinated forces executing complex maneuvers under challenging conditions. The Third Army's relief of Bastogne demonstrated that American military power was not merely quantitative, it was qualitative. And it was animated by something the German military system could not match: decentralized initiative within a framework of clear strategic intent. Patton's subordinate commanders understood his intent and executed boldly within that framework. When roads were blocked, they found alternate routes. When resistance stiffened, they maneuvered around it. When opportunities appeared, they exploited them without waiting for explicit orders. This was mission-type orders, ****, the very principle Germans prided themselves on, being executed by Americans with devastating effectiveness. The frozen roads of the Ardennes became, in this sense, a proving ground not just for armies but for systems. The American system, democratic, decentralized, industrialized, was demonstrating its ability to outthink and outfight the German system, even in the type of mobile warfare Germans had pioneered. For the German staff officers tracking Patton's advance, this realization carried profound implications. They were not just losing battles. They were losing the war in a way that challenged their fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness and national character. By January 1945, as Allied forces compressed the Ardennes bulge and pushed German armies back toward the Rhine, the mythology of Wehrmacht invincibility had been thoroughly dismantled. And Patton's 90-mile advance stood as one of the most visible symbols of that dismantling. In the decades after the war, military historians would debate Patton's place in the pantheon of great commanders. His advocates pointed to his operational brilliance, his aggressive spirit, his ability to inspire soldiers and terrorize enemies. His critics noted his sometimes reckless attacks, his controversial statements, his difficult personality. But even his critics acknowledged the Ardennes relief as a masterpiece. To pivot an entire army in winter, to move it 90 miles through enemy territory, to break a siege and reverse the momentum of an enemy offensive. This was generalship of the highest order. It required not just tactical skill but strategic vision, not just courage but calculation, not just aggression but precision. The German staff officers who muttered, "He's moving again," understood this implicitly. They were not just commenting on troop movements. They were acknowledging that they faced a commander who had mastered the art of mobile warfare, who had turned their own doctrinal principles against them, who had demonstrated that speed and audacity could overcome superior defensive positions and veteran troops. In the final analysis, Patton's relief of Bastogne represented a turning point not just in the Battle of the Bulge, but in the broader narrative of the Second World War. It was the moment when American operational competence fully manifested, when the industrial and organizational advantages of the Allied cause were wielded by a commander who understood how to translate those advantages into battlefield success. The snow still fell across the Ardennes in late December 1944, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The German offensive had failed. The American counteroffensive had succeeded. And George Patton had proven that American arms, properly led, could move faster, strike harder, and fight better than any army in the world. Before we close this chapter of history, if this story gave you a new perspective on Patton and the Battle of the Bulge, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten moments from the war that changed the world. There is a photograph, rarely published, taken in early January 1945. It shows a jeep stopped along a muddy road near Bastogne. In the foreground, an American soldier leans against the hood, smoking a cigarette, his rifle propped nearby. In the background, barely visible through the winter haze, columns of German prisoners march under guard toward the rear. The soldier's face is relaxed, almost bored. He has the look of someone who has already moved on mentally from this battle to the next. His uniform is muddy and worn, but his equipment is well maintained. On the Jeep's bumper, someone has stenciled in white paint, "Third Army, Hell on Wheels." It is an unremarkable photograph in many ways, just another tired soldier in another winter campaign. But it captures something essential about what the German staff officers witnessed in those desperate December days. The American system, pragmatic, adaptable, relentlessly forward-moving, did not pause to celebrate victories or lament setbacks. It simply moved to the next objective. Under commanders like Patton, that system became a machine of war that could outproduce, outmove, and ultimately outfight any opponent. When German officers said, "He's moving again," they were not just talking about Patton. They were talking about America itself, a nation that had mobilized its vast resources, its industrial capacity, its human energy, and focused them all on a single purpose: victory. And in the winter of 1944, along the frozen roads of the Ardennes, that purpose was made manifest. 90 miles in 1 week. Through snow and enemy fire, against veteran troops and prepared defenses. It was impossible. Patton did it anyway. Because that was what Patton did. He moved, and he kept moving until the enemy broke, until resistance crumbled, until victory was won. The German staff officers, marking their maps with trembling hands, watching their carefully planned offensive collapse under the weight of American steel and audacity, learned this lesson the hard way. When Patton moved, armies followed. When Patton attacked, enemies fell back. When Patton set his mind to relieving Bastogne, no amount of snow, No strength of German resistance, no challenge of terrain or logistics could stop him. Mein Gott, bewegt sich wieder. My God, he's moving again. It was not a complaint. It was not even really an observation. It was a prayer, spoken by men who knew they were facing something beyond their capacity to counter. A force of nature wrapped in American determination, driving forward with unstoppable momentum toward an inevitable conclusion. The winter wind still howled through the Ardennes that January. The snow still fell, but the tide had turned. The German offensive was broken. Bastogne was relieved. And somewhere ahead, already planning his next attack, George S. Patton Jr. was moving again. He was always moving. And that, more than any single battle or tactical decision, was what made him great.